Millionaire witnesses poor twins being kicked out. The truth shatters him. The sound of children crying in the bitter cold shouldn't exist. Yet there it was, piercing through the December night like shattered glass against Theodore Wayne's soul. Hello, beautiful souls. Before we dive into this heart-stopping story that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about kindness and fate, I need to know, where in this incredible world are you watching from tonight? Drop your country or city in the comments below, because this community spans the globe, and I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please do it now, because stories like this one, stories that restore your faith in humanity, are exactly what we share here every single week. Theodore's breath crystallized in the frozen air as he rounded the corner of 5th Street, his $1,000 coat doing nothing to shield him from what he was about to witness. The temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees, the kind of cold that turned tears to ice before they could fall. And yet there they were, two small figures huddled together on the sidewalk like abandoned dolls. The twins couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Clementine Miller pressed her face against her sister's shoulder, her tiny body trembling beneath a coat that had seen too many winters, patches upon patches covering holes that kept growing larger. Ramona Miller wrapped her thin arms around her sister, whispering something Theodore couldn't hear, but the desperation in her voice carried across the empty street like a prayer no one was answering. I don't care if it's Christmas week. The voice that shattered the night air belonged to a man built like a bulldozer, his designer suit completely at odds with the cruelty pouring from his mouth. Draco Corleone stood in the doorway of the rundown apartment building, his breath forming angry clouds as he gestured wildly. Rent was due 2 weeks ago, and I've had enough of the sob stories. Theodore's steps slowed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd been walking these streets for months now, unable to sleep in his penthouse, haunted by dreams he couldn't explain and a restlessness that money couldn't cure. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this. Please, Mr. Corleone. Clementine's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of desperation that made Theodore's chest tighten. We can get the money. Mama said she almost has it. Just one more day. Your mom has said a lot of things before she. Draco's words cut off abruptly, his eyes scanning the street as if suddenly aware they weren't alone. Before she what? Theodore found himself stepping closer, his expensive shoes crunching on the thin layer of ice that covered the sidewalk. The question hung in the freezing air like a loaded weapon, and something deep in his gut told him that whatever truth lay hidden in those unfinished words would change everything. Ramona pulled her sister closer, and that's when Theodore saw it. The way she positioned herself between Clementine and the landlord, the way her small chin jutted out with defiance even as her body shook with cold and fear. She was protecting her sister with the fierce love of someone who had learned too young that the world could be merciless. You got somewhere to go. Draco's voice had taken on a mocking tone that made Theodore's hands clench into fists. Because this fairy tale ends tonight. Building's being sold anyway, and the new owners don't want any. He paused, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the twins with disgust. Any complications? The way he said complications sent ice through Theodore's veins that had nothing to do with the weather. Clementine looked up at her sister, and in that moment, Theodore saw something that would haunt him forever. Hope dying in a child's eyes. Ramona, she whispered, I'm scared. I know. Butterfly, Ramona whispered back, using a nickname that was so tender, so full of love, that Theodore had to steady himself against a nearby lamppost. But we're going to be okay. We have each other, remember? We always have each other. The streetlight above cast long shadows across the scene, turning the falling snow into tiny dancers that seemed to mock the tragedy unfolding below. Theodore watched as Draco Corleone tossed a small bag onto the sidewalk, everything the twins owned, apparently fitting into a space smaller than Theodore's briefcase. There, Draco said, wiping his hands as if he'd just taken out the trash. Don't let me catch you hanging around here tomorrow, or I'm calling the cops. As the landlord's footsteps echoed down the hallway and the building door slammed shut with finality, Theodore was left staring at a scene that would either break him or remake him entirely. But it was what happened next. What Ramona whispered to her sister as they sat in the snow, what she pulled from her tiny pocket, and the truth about their mother that Draco had almost revealed, that would shatter everything Theodore thought he knew about loss, love, and the real reason these children were truly alone. The twins had no idea they were being watched, no idea that their next words would change the course of 3 lives forever, and no idea that the man standing frozen in the shadows was about to discover a connection to them that would turn his entire world upside down. What secret was Ramona about to reveal to her sister? And what truth about their mother had Draco almost let slip? A truth so devastating it would explain everything and change the course of this story in ways no one could predict. Theodore Wayne stood motionless in the shadows, his heart hammering a rhythm that felt foreign in his chest. For 28 years, he'd built walls around his emotions so high that even he'd forgotten what lived behind them. Tonight, watching 2 children face the kind of abandonment that had once destroyed him, those walls were cracking like ice under pressure. The memory hit him without warning. Himself at age 8, standing in a similar doorway, watching his own world collapse. His parents' car accident had been swift, clinical, and final. One moment he'd been Theodore Wayne, beloved son of Dr. Elena Wayne and Professor James Wayne, and the next he'd been Theodore Wayne, ward of the state, heir to a fortune he couldn't touch until he turned 21, bounced between relatives who saw dollar signs instead of a grieving child. But these twins, they had each other. They had something he'd never had in those dark years. Someone who understood their pain, someone who would fight for them, someone who whispered butterfly with such tender love that it made his chest ache with longing for what he'd lost. Ramona Miller was pulling something from her pocket, her movements careful and deliberate despite the way her small body shook with cold. Theodore found himself leaning forward, straining to see what treasure she considered worth protecting even in this moment of complete devastation. It was a photograph, cracked and worn from countless handlings. "Look, Clementine," Ramona whispered, her voice carrying that particular strength that only comes from being forced to grow up too fast. "Mama's still with us. She's always with us." Clementine's tear-streaked face lifted toward her sister, and even from his distance, Theodore could see the way hope flickered back to life in her eyes. "Tell me the story again," she whispered, "about how Mama saved the whole hospital." Theodore's breath caught. Hospital? His mind immediately jumped to his parents. Both doctors, both killed while rushing to save others during a late-night emergency call. The coincidence felt like a punch to his solar plexus. "She was the best nurse they ever had," Ramona began, her voice taking on the practice cadence of someone who'd told this story countless times. "Remember how she used to say that healing people wasn't just about medicine? It was about love," Clementine finished, her small voice growing stronger. "About making people feel safe when they were scared." Theodore closed his eyes, and suddenly he was 8 years old again, lying in a hospital bed after the accident, scared and alone, when a nurse with gentle hands and kind eyes had sat with him through the night. She told him stories, brought him warm milk, and held his hand when the nightmares came. He'd never learned her name, but her face had stayed with him for 20 years. Warm brown eyes, dark hair always escaping from her ponytail, and a smile that could chase away the darkest fears. The realization hit him like lightning. His phone buzzed, shattering the moment. The caller ID showed Vivian Cross, his assistant, probably calling about tomorrow's board meeting or the charity gala he was supposed to attend. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd donated millions to children's charities while walking past real children in need every night for months. He declined the call, but it reminded him of something crucial. 6 months ago, his company had purchased several buildings in this neighborhood for redevelopment. The residents had been given eviction notices, but Theodore had left all the details to his property management team. He'd never visited the sites personally, never seen the faces of the people being displaced. Buildings being sold anyway, Draco had said. The new owners don't want any complications. Theodore was the new owner. The weight of that realization settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. These children weren't just victims of circumstance. They were victims of his business decisions, made from the comfort of his glass office 40 stories above the real world. "I'm so cold, Ramona," Clementine whispered, and her sister immediately began rubbing her hands, breathing on them to provide what little warmth she could. "I know, butterfly. Here, let's play the warm place game." Okay, Clementine said, snuggling closer to her sister. Tell me about the beach where Mama took us last summer. Theodore watched as Ramona painted a picture with words. Warm sand between their toes, the sound of waves, the taste of ice cream that dripped down their chins while their mother laughed. It was a masterpiece of love and imagination, designed to transport her sister away from their current nightmare. But it was the next part of their conversation that made Theodore's blood run cold. Ramona, Clementine said quietly, when the police came to tell us about Mama's accident, they said something about how she died. Something about trying to save someone else. What did they mean? Ramona's face went through a series of emotions. Pain, pride, and something that looked almost like guilt. Mama was driving home from her night shift when she saw a car crash, she said slowly. There was a little boy trapped inside, and the car was starting to catch fire. Mama, she went in to get him out. Theodore's legs nearly gave out. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Did she save him? Clementine asked. Yes, Ramona whispered. She saved him. But the car exploded right after she got him out, and her voice broke. The little boy lived, but Mama didn't make it. The world tilted sideways. Theodore gripped the lamppost harder, his expensive gloves doing nothing to stop his hands from shaking. 3 weeks ago, he'd received a call from the police about a car accident. A woman had died saving a child who turned out to be the son of one of Theodore's business partners. He'd sent flowers to the woman's funeral, a generic arrangement ordered by his assistant. He'd never learned the woman's name. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew about yourself just shattered? Drop a comment below about a time when life surprised you, because this story is just getting started, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around for what happens next. She was a hero, Clementine said fiercely. Mama was a real hero. The best hero, Ramona agreed. But Theodore caught the tremor in her voice that spoke of a grief too large for such small shoulders to carry. As the twins huddled together, sharing warmth and memories, Theodore felt something breaking open inside his chest. He'd spent his entire adult life building an empire, accumulating wealth and power, but he'd never once stopped to consider what that really meant. He'd never asked whose lives were affected by his decisions, whose homes were demolished for his developments, whose families were scattered in the name of profit margins. Standing there in the snow, watching 2 children face a future that seemed impossibly dark, Theodore Wayne realized that everything he'd built meant nothing if it couldn't protect the people who truly mattered. But as he stepped forward, finally ready to act, ready to introduce himself and offer help, he had no idea that the next few minutes would reveal a truth so stunning, so impossible, that it would redefine everything he thought he knew about fate, family, and the mysterious ways that broken hearts sometimes find their way back together. What he was about to discover about these twins, about their mother, and about his own past would either destroy him completely or give him the one thing his money had never been able to buy. The truth was about to change everything. Theodore's expensive shoes made no sound as he stepped out of the shadows, his heart pounding so hard he was certain the twins would hear it. Every instinct screamed at him to approach carefully. These children had just been traumatized, and a stranger emerging from the darkness would only terrify them further. But before he could take another step, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the empty street. Clementine, Ramona. A woman's voice, breathless and panicked, shattered the quiet night. Oh my God, girls, I'm so sorry I'm late. Theodore froze as a figure rounded the corner at full sprint, her long coat billowing behind her like wings. Even in the dim streetlight, he could see she was young, maybe mid-20s, with auburn hair escaping from a messy bun and determination written across every line of her face. Isabella Gump crashed to her knees in the snow beside the twins, not caring that the ice soaked through her jeans immediately. I got here as fast as I could, she gasped, pulling both girls into a fierce embrace. The bus broke down, and I had to run 15 blocks, but I'm here now. I'm here. Theodore watched, transfixed, as the twins melted into this woman's arms like they'd been waiting for her their entire lives. Isabella, Clementine cried, and for the first time since Theodore had been watching, genuine joy broke through the despair in her voice. We thought you weren't coming. I will always come for you, Isabella said fiercely, her voice thick with emotion. Always. Do you hear me? Nothing in this world would stop me from getting to you. There was something about the way she held them, like they were precious beyond measure, like she would fight armies to protect them. That made Theodore's chest tighten with recognition. This wasn't just care. This was love, raw and desperate and real. What happened? Isabella demanded, her green eyes scanning the twins for injuries. Why are you outside? Where's Mrs. Patterson? Ramona's face crumpled. She said she couldn't keep us anymore. Her daughter found out about us staying there and got really mad. Mrs. Patterson was crying when she told us we had to leave. Isabella's face went through a series of emotions. Pain, rage, determination. And Draco threw you out. Tonight? In this weather? He said the building's being sold. Clementine whispered. He said the new owners don't want complications. The word complications hit Theodore like a physical blow. These children, these beautiful, innocent children, were being called complications because of his business decisions. Isabella's hands clenched into fists. That monster, she breathed. Why get my hands on? She stopped herself, clearly remembering her audience. It doesn't matter. What matters is getting you somewhere warm. Come on, let's go. Where? Ramona asked, and Theodore heard the exhaustion in her small voice. We don't have anywhere else. Isabella's pause lasted only a heartbeat, but Theodore caught it. She was scrambling, trying to figure out a solution on the spot. My apartment, she said finally. You'll stay with me. But your landlord said. I don't care what my landlord said. Isabella interrupted, her voice fierce. You're not spending one more minute in this cold. That's when Theodore made the decision that would change everything. He stepped into the circle of streetlights. Excuse me, he said quietly, his voice carefully controlled to avoid startling them. 3 faces turned toward him, and Theodore felt the full impact of their stares. Isabella immediately shifted, placing herself between the twins and this stranger, her body language screaming protection and suspicion. Stay back, she warned, her voice sharp as glass. The girls have been through enough tonight. But it was Ramona who spoke next, her young voice cutting through the tension with devastating precision. I know you, she said, her head tilting as she studied Theodore's face. You're the man from Mama's picture. The world stopped. What? Isabella breathed, her protective stance wavering as confusion replaced suspicion. Ramona was digging in her pocket again, pulling out that worn photograph Theodore had seen her show her sister. But now she was holding it up, comparing the image to Theodore's face with the intense concentration of a child who'd memorized every detail of something precious. This picture, Ramona said, her voice growing stronger with certainty. Mama kept it in her wallet. She said it was the little boy she saved a long time ago, and she always wondered what happened to him. Theodore's legs nearly buckled. With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone, scrolling through his photos until he found the one he kept hidden in a private folder. A hospital photo from 20 years ago, showing him as an 8-year-old boy being hugged by a nurse whose face he'd never forgotten. He held the phone out with trembling fingers. Isabella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's Maria. That's their mother. The photograph in Ramona's hand wasn't just any picture. It was a copy of the same photo on Theodore's phone, showing him as a child with the woman who'd saved his life twice. Once by pulling him from that burning car 20 years ago, and once by sitting with him through the darkest night of his childhood, making him feel safe when the whole world had crumbled around him. Maria Miller hadn't just died saving a stranger's child 3 weeks ago. She died saving the same child she'd saved 20 years before, Theodore Wayne, the man who now owned the building her daughters were being evicted from, the man whose business empire had unknowingly destroyed the only home they had left. You're him, Clementine whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. You're the boy Mama saved. She used to tell us about you. She said you had the saddest eyes she'd ever seen, but that you were going to do something important someday. Theodore couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The cosmic impossibility of this moment was crushing him under its weight. But Isabella was staring at him with dawning recognition, and when she spoke, her voice carried a mixture of awe and accusation that made his blood run cold. Theodore Wayne, she breathed. You're Theodore Wayne, aren't you? Theodore Wayne who owns half this city. Theodore Wayne whose company just bought this entire neighborhood. The twins looked between them, confusion replacing wonder. "You own our building?" Ramona asked, her voice small and confused. "But that means he's the reason we're homeless," Isabella finished, her voice turning to ice as the full implications hit her. "He's the reason you're sitting in the snow tonight." Theodore opened his mouth to explain, to defend himself, to say something, anything, that might make this better. But before he could speak, Isabella's phone rang, the sound sharp and urgent in the frozen air. She answered without looking away from him. "Hello." Theodore watched her face change, watched color drain from her cheeks, as whoever was on the other end delivered news that made her sway on her feet. "What do you mean evicted?" she whispered into the phone. "But I paid rent. I paid for it yesterday." A pause. "What do you mean the building was sold? What do you mean everyone has to be out by morning?" She hung up, her hands shaking as she looked down at the twins who were watching her with growing terror. "Isabella," Clementine whispered. "What's wrong?" Theodore realized with horrifying clarity what had just happened. His property management company hadn't just evicted the twins. They'd cleared the entire neighborhood. Every building, every tenant, every person who called this place home, including the woman who'd been trying to save them. "We don't have anywhere to go," Isabella said quietly, her voice hollow with shock. "My apartment, Mrs. Patterson's place, everyone, we're all being evicted. Tonight." She looked up at Theodore, and the betrayal in her eyes was like a knife to his heart. "Your empire," she said, her voice shaking with rage and despair. "Your profit margins. Your redevelopment plans. Did you even think about the people you were destroying? Did you even care that families would be torn apart? That children would be sleeping in the snow?" Theodore stood frozen, watching the woman he was already beginning to fall for. This fierce protector with fire in her eyes and love in her heart. Look at him like he was the monster in every fairy tale she'd ever told the twins. And the terrible truth was, she was right. But what none of them knew, what Theodore was about to discover as the next few minutes unfolded, was that this moment of devastating revelation was actually the beginning of something larger, something that would test them all beyond their limits and force them to confront not just what they'd lost, but what they were willing to fight for. Because the real crisis was just beginning, and the choices they made in the next few hours would determine whether love could truly conquer the mistakes of the past, or whether some wounds were simply too deep to heal. The night was far from over, and the hardest truths were still to come. The silence that followed Isabella's accusation stretched like a taut wire between them, ready to snap. Theodore could see his breath in the frozen air, but the cold inside his chest had nothing to do with the weather. 3 sets of eyes watched him, 2 small faces filled with confusion and fear, and one burning with righteous fury that made his heart race for all the wrong reasons. "You're right," he said finally, his voice hoarse with shame. "You're absolutely right." Isabella blinked, clearly not expecting that response. She'd probably prepared herself for excuses, for corporate double-speak, for anything except raw honesty. "I didn't know," Theodore continued, stepping closer despite the way Isabella's body language screamed at him to stay back. "I signed papers. I approved budgets. I made decisions from a boardroom 40 stories above the real world, and I never once thought about the people those decisions would affect. But you're thinking about it now." Isabella's voice dripped with skepticism, but Theodore caught something else underneath, a flicker of hope she was trying desperately to hide. "Now I can't think about anything else," he admitted, his eyes moving to the twins who were watching this exchange like it might determine their fate, which, he realized, it probably would. Clementine's teeth were chattering audibly now, and Ramona had wrapped her thin coat around both of them, sacrificing her own warmth for her sisters. The sight made Theodore's decision for him. "My car's around the corner," he said, pulling out his keys. "It's warm, and it's big enough for all of us. Let me take you somewhere safe while we figure this out." "Absolutely not," Isabella said immediately. "I'm not getting in a car with a stranger, and I'm certainly not letting the girls." "I'm not a stranger," Theodore interrupted gently. "I'm the boy Maria saved. Twice, apparently. And right now, I'm the only person standing here who has the power to fix this mess. How do we know you're really him?" Isabella demanded, but her voice had lost some of its edge. She was cold too, Theodore realized, though she was hiding it better than the twins. Ramona spoke up before Theodore could answer. "He has Mama's eyes," she said simply. In the picture, Mama always said the little boy had sad eyes, but kind ones. She said that's how she knew he would grow up to help people. The faith in her small voice nearly broke Theodore completely. I haven't been helping people, he said, crouching down to Ramona's eye level. But I want to learn how. Your mama. She saved my life when I was your age. Maybe you too can teach me how to save someone else's. Isabella made a frustrated sound. This is insane. You can't just. Her words were cut off by the sound of a police siren, growing closer. All four of them turned toward the sound, and Theodore saw panic flash across Isabella's face. What if someone called about the girls being out here alone? She whispered. What if they try to put them in the system? The system. Theodore knew what that meant. He'd barely escaped it himself, saved only by his inheritance and distant relatives who'd taken him in reluctantly. These girls had no inheritance, no wealthy family to claim them. My car, he said again, standing and extending his hand to Isabella. Please. We can argue about everything else once they're warm and safe. Isabella stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, and Theodore could practically see the internal battle playing out across her face. Trust warred with suspicion, desperation fought with pride, and underneath it all, he glimpsed something that made his heart skip, a flicker of attraction she was trying hard to ignore. 5 minutes, she said finally, taking his hand. The contact sent electricity shooting up his arm, and from the way she quickly pulled away, she'd felt it too. We get them warm, then we talk. Theodore's car was exactly what Isabella had probably expected. A sleek black sedan that cost more than most people made in 2 years. But as he helped the twins into the heated leather seats and turned the temperature up to maximum, she seemed less concerned with luxury and more focused on the immediate relief on the children's faces. Better? Theodore asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Much better, Clementine sighed, her small body finally relaxing as warmth enveloped her. Isabella settled into the passenger seat, her wet jeans already steaming slightly in the heat. Where are we going? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. My hotel, Theodore said, then quickly clarified as he saw her expression. Own it. The penthouse suite has 3 bedrooms, room service, and more space than you'll know what to do with. We can't afford. You're my guests, Theodore said firmly. All of you. For as long as you need. Why? Isabella's question was sharp, probing. What do you get out of this? Theodore was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer honestly without scaring her away. Your mama saved my life when I was 8 years old, he said finally. She stayed with me through the worst night of my childhood, held my hand when I was terrified, and made me feel like maybe the world wasn't completely dark after all. He glanced at her, struck again by the fire in her green eyes, the way she seemed to glow even when she was furious with him. 3 weeks ago, she died saving my life again. The least I can do is make sure her daughters are safe and warm tonight. Isabella was quiet, digesting this. You said she saved your life twice. What happened 3 weeks ago? Theodore's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Car accident. I was driving to a business dinner when I hit black ice and crashed. The car caught fire, and I was trapped. The memory still made him break out in a cold sweat. A woman pulled me out just before the explosion. The police said she was driving home from her nursing shift, saw the accident, and didn't hesitate. She never hesitated, Ramona said quietly from the back seat. Mama always said that when someone needed help, you didn't think about it. You just helped. She sounds like an amazing woman, Theodore said, meaning it completely. She was, Isabella said softly, and for the first time since he'd met her, the anger in her voice was replaced by something gentler. She was the best person I knew. How did you know her? Theodore asked, genuinely curious. She was my supervisor at the hospital, Isabella explained. I'm a pediatric nurse, and when I first started, I was terrified I'd mess up, hurt a child somehow. Maria took me under her wing, taught me that nursing wasn't just about medical care. It was about healing hearts too. Theodore felt something shift in his chest. You're a nurse. Like she was. Trying to be, Isabella said with a rueful smile. I'm still learning. In the back seat, Clementine had fallen asleep against her sister's shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. Ramona was fighting to stay awake, but her eyelids were growing heavy. They're so strong, Theodore murmured, watching them in the mirror. They have to be, Isabella said, and there was pain in her voice. After Maria died, I've been trying to help however I could, but the state won't let me officially take them. I'm not family. I'm too young. I don't make enough money. She trailed off, frustration evident in every word. What happens to them? Foster care. Probably separated, since most families don't want to take two children. Isabella's voice broke slightly. They've already lost their mother. They shouldn't lose each other too. Theodore felt something crystallizing in his mind, a plan forming that was probably crazy but felt absolutely right. What if there was another way? He asked carefully. Isabella turned to look at him, suspicious again. What do you mean? But before Theodore could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his lawyer's name, and something cold settled in his stomach. His attorney never called this late, unless there was an emergency. I have to take this, he said apologetically, pulling over to the side of the road. Theodore, his lawyer's voice was grim. We have a problem. That neighborhood redevelopment project? There's been a complication. Theodore's blood ran cold. What kind of complication? Someone's filed an injunction. Claims the evictions were illegal, that proper notice wasn't given. They're asking for a full investigation into the company's practices, and... He paused. They're specifically naming you as personally responsible for the displacement of several families. Theodore glanced at Isabella, who was watching him with a growing alarm. Who filed the injunction? He asked. A law firm representing displaced tenants. The lead attorney is someone named Victoria Hastings, and according to my sources, she's building a class-action lawsuit that could cost you everything. As Theodore hung up, he realized their problems had just multiplied exponentially. Not only were they dealing with the immediate crisis of housing the twins, but now his entire business empire was under attack. And if he lost everything, he'd have no resources to help anyone. Looking at Isabella's concerned face, at the sleeping twins in his back seat, Theodore knew he was about to make the biggest gamble of his life. But first, he had to tell them that the nightmare was far from over. If you're finding yourself as invested in Theodore's journey as I am, drop a comment below about a time when you had to choose between doing what was safe and doing what was right. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this impossible situation gets resolved. The truth about Victoria Hastings, the lawsuit, and the shocking connection that would soon come to light was about to change everything they thought they knew about who they could trust and what they were really fighting for. The penthouse elevator climbed 47 floors in silence, broken only by the soft sound of Clementine's breathing as she slept in Theodore's arms. Isabella walked beside him, her hand protectively on Ramona's shoulder, and despite everything that had happened tonight, Theodore found himself acutely aware of her presence. The way she smelled like vanilla and determination, the way her green eyes seemed to see straight through to his soul. The elevator doors opened to reveal a space that belonged in architectural magazines, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern luxury. But Theodore barely noticed his own home. He was too focused on the way Isabella's breath caught as she took in a view of the city spread out below them like a carpet of stars. "Mama would have loved this," Ramona whispered, pressing her small face against the glass. "She always said the city looked like magic at night." "It does," Isabella agreed softly, and something in her voice made Theodore's chest tighten. "Guest bedrooms are down the hall," he said, shifting Clementine's weight carefully. "The girls can share the one with twin beds, and you can take the master guest suite. Where will you sleep?" Isabella asked. "I don't sleep much anyway," Theodore admitted. "I'll be fine on the couch." As they got the twins settled, Clementine barely stirring as Isabella tucked her undercovers that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, Theodore found himself watching the way Isabella moved. She was gentle but efficient, clearly experienced with caring for children, and the love in her actions was so evident it made his heart ache. "They're safe now," Isabella said quietly as they closed the bedroom door behind them. "For tonight," Theodore agreed. "But we need to talk about what happens next." They settled in his living room, the city lights casting shifting patterns across the walls. Isabella had accepted a cup of tea, wrapping her hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth into her bones. "Tell me about this lawsuit," she said without preamble. Theodore's phone buzzed before he could answer. Another call from his lawyer, and this time the news was even worse. The injunction was granted. His attorney's voice was grim through the speaker. "All evictions in the neighborhood are suspended pending investigation." But Theodore, there's something else. Something I think you need to know about Victoria Hastings. What about her? Theodore asked, glancing at Isabella, who was listening intently. She's not just any attorney. She's been specifically targeting your company for months, building cases against several of your properties. And according to my research, she has a very personal reason for wanting to destroy you. Theodore's stomach dropped. What kind of personal reason? She lost someone in one of your buildings. A sister, I think. Apparently, this woman was evicted from one of your properties last year, ended up on the streets, and the lawyer's voice trailed off. She died of exposure 3 months later. Victoria Hastings blames you directly for her sister's death. The phone slipped from Theodore's hands, clattering onto the coffee table. But it wasn't his lawyer's words that had shocked him into silence. It was the look on Isabella's face. She'd gone completely white, her hands shaking so violently that tea spilled over the rim of her mug. Isabella, Theodore said carefully. What is it? Victoria, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Victoria Hastings is my sister. The world tilted sideways. What? Theodore breathed. Isabella set down her mug with trembling hands. My sister. My older sister, who I haven't spoken to in 2 years, because... She stopped, pressing her hands to her face. Oh God, this is all my fault. Isabella, talk to me, Theodore said, moving closer to her on the couch. What happened with your sister? We had a fight, Isabella said, her voice muffled by her hands. A horrible, awful fight about my choice to become a nurse instead of a lawyer like her. She said I was wasting my potential, that I was throwing my life away to take care of other people's problems instead of fixing the real issues in the world. She looked up at him, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. She was working on some big case about tenants' rights, and she wanted me to help her research medical neglect in low-income housing. But I was so tired, Theodore. I was working double shifts at the hospital, barely keeping my own head above water, and I just... She broke off, tears streaming down her face. You said no, Theodore said gently. I said worse than no. I told her that her crusades wouldn't bring back her parents, that she was just playing lawyer games while real people needed real help. I told her. Isabella's voice cracked. I told her that her righteous anger was just selfishness in disguise. Theodore felt pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The woman who died. The one Victoria blames me for. Sarah, Isabella whispered. Sarah Hastings. She was Victoria's girlfriend, and she was living in one of your buildings when she got evicted. Victoria tried to fight it legally, but the paperwork was all in order. The notices were technically proper. But it was winter, Theodore said, understanding flooding through him. And she had nowhere to go. Isabella nodded, tears falling freely now. Victoria called me when Sarah died. She was sobbing, begging me to help her build a case against the property company. But I was so angry about our fight, so stubborn and hurt, that She covered her face again. I hung up on her. I hung up on my sister when she needed me most. And now she's coming after me, Theodore said quietly. Not just for Sarah, but because she somehow found out you're here with me. She has people watching your properties, Isabella said, her voice hollow with realization. If she saw me with you tonight, saw me with the twins, she'll think I betrayed everything she's fighting for. Theodore's phone rang again, and this time it was an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Wayne. The voice was crisp, professional, and completely cold. This is Victoria Hastings. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Isabella went rigid beside him. I'm not sure what you mean, Theodore said carefully. My sister, Mr. Wayne. Isabella Gump. I know she's with you, and I know she has 2 children with her. Children who were evicted from your property tonight. I'm calling to arrange their immediate pickup. Pickup. Theodore's blood ran cold. Child Protective Services will be at your building in 30 minutes. Victoria's voice was like ice. Those children need proper care, not whatever fantasy you and my misguided sister think you can provide. And as for Isabella, her voice turned deadly. She'll be coming with me. We have a lot to discuss about her choice of company. The line went dead. Theodore looked at Isabella, who had heard every word. Her face was a mask of devastation and betrayal. She called CPS, Isabella whispered. My own sister called CPS to take the twins away. We won't let that happen, Theodore said fiercely, surprised by the strength in his own voice. Ow! Isabella laughed bitterly. You're a billionaire facing a lawsuit that could destroy your empire, and I'm a nurse with no legal rights to children who aren't even related to me. What can we possibly do against the system? Theodore stood up, his mind racing. We can run. What? My plane, he said, ideas forming rapidly. I can have it ready in an hour. We take the girls somewhere safe while we figure out how to fight this properly. That's kidnapping, Isabella said. That's love, Theodore interrupted, and the word hung between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to cross so soon. Isabella, I know this is crazy. I know we just met, and I know every rational thought in your head is telling you not to trust me. But those little girls upstairs, they trust you. They need you. And you. He reached for her hands, relief flooding through him when she didn't pull away. You've already changed my life in ways I can't even explain. Isabella stared at him, and Theodore could see the war playing out across her face. Fear battled with hope, logic fought with love, and underneath it all, he glimpsed something that made his heart race. You're falling for me, he said quietly, not really a question. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We've known each other for 3 hours. Sometimes 3 hours is enough, Theodore said, moving closer to her. Sometimes you meet someone and everything just clicks, like the universe has been waiting for this moment. The universe has a terrible sense of timing, Isabella said, but she was looking at his lips now, and Theodore felt the space between them crackling with electricity. Maybe, he agreed, his voice dropping to a whisper, or maybe this is exactly when we were supposed to find each other, when we both needed saving. They were inches apart now, and Theodore could feel her breath on his face, could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could smell that intoxicating scent of vanilla and courage that seemed to follow her everywhere. Theodore, she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. But before either of them could close the remaining distance, a sound from the elevator made them spring apart. The doors were opening. Victoria Hastings stepped into the penthouse like an avenging angel, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expensive suit immaculate despite the late hour. Behind her stood 2 CPS workers and a police officer. Hello, little sister, Victoria said, her voice carrying 20 years of complicated history. We need to talk. If you're as stunned by this family revelation as I am, drop a comment below. Have you ever had a family member make a choice that completely shocked you? Because this confrontation is about to get intense. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Isabella stood frozen, caught between the man she was falling for and the sister she'd lost, with 2 sleeping children upstairs whose entire future hung in the balance. The next few minutes would determine whether love could triumph over law, whether family could overcome betrayal, and whether Theodore's money and power could protect the people who had already become more important to him than his entire empire. The real battle was just beginning. The silence in Theodore's penthouse stretched like a chasm between the sisters, 20 years of love and loss and bitter words creating a tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Victoria Hastings stood framed by the city lights, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor as she surveyed the scene before her with the cold precision of a prosecutor building a case. You look well, Isabella, Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that came from months of carefully banked rage. Considering you've been harboring fugitive children and consorting with the enemy. They're not fugitives, Isabella said, finding her voice despite the way her entire body was trembling. They're homeless children who need help. Help. Victoria's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. From him, she gestured toward Theodore with disgust. The man responsible for Sarah's death? The man whose company has destroyed dozens of families just like ours. Theodore stepped forward, his protective instincts overriding his shock. Miss Hastings, whatever issues you have with me, this isn't the time or place. There are children sleeping upstairs who... Don't. Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare talk to me about children, Mr. Wayne. Not when your business practices have left countless families on the streets. Not when your greed killed the woman I loved. The pain in her words was so raw that even Theodore felt it like a physical blow. But it was Isabella who stepped between them, her face a mask of anguish. Victoria, please, she whispered. I know you're hurting. I know I failed you when Sarah died. But these girls are going to proper care, Victoria interrupted. Ms. Chun. She nodded to one of the CPS workers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an apologetic expression. The children, please. Wait, Isabella said desperately. You can't just. I can and I will, Victoria said. You have no legal standing here, Isabella. No custody, no guardianship papers, nothing. And Mr. Wayne. She turned her laser focus back to Theodore. Well, his legal troubles are just beginning. The police officer, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation, cleared his throat. Ma'am, if the children are safe and well cared for, we might not need to. Officer Martinez. Victoria's voice cut through his protest like steel. These children were found on the streets tonight, evicted from housing owned by Mr. Wayne's company. They were in immediate danger, and placing them with individuals who have no legal authority to care for them is not in their best interests. Theodore watched the legal machinery grinding in motion and felt something cold settle in his chest. All his money, all his power, all his influence, and he was helpless to stop this woman from tearing apart the fragile family that had somehow formed in the space of a few hours. I'll wake them, Ms. Chin said gently to Isabella. It'll be easier if they hear it from you. No, Isabella breathed, and the desperation in that single word made Theodore's heart shatter. Please no. They've been through so much already. Don't make them go through this too. But footsteps on the stairs announced that the decision had been taken from them. Ramona appeared at the top of the staircase, her small frame silhouetted against the hallway light, with Clementine's sleepy face peering over her shoulder. Isabella. Ramona's voice was small and confused. What's happening? Who are all these people? Theodore watched Isabella's face crumble as she looked up at the twins, and he knew with devastating clarity that this moment would haunt all of them forever. Girls, Isabella said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to sound calm. These people, they're here to help. They want to make sure you're safe. We are safe, Clementine said, rubbing her eyes. We're with you and Theodore. The simple faith in her words was like a knife through Theodore's chest. These children trusted them, loved them, and they were about to be ripped away because of his failures, his choices, his inability to see beyond profit margins to the human cost of his business empire. I'm sorry, girls, Ms. Chun said, her voice genuinely kind as she started up the stairs. But we need to find you a proper place to stay. Somewhere more permanent. No, Ramona's cry echoed through the penthouse. We want to stay here. Isabella promised we could stay with her. Isabella doesn't have the authority to make that promise, Victoria said, and there was something almost gentle in her voice as she looked at the twins. But we'll find you a nice family, somewhere you'll be safe and loved. Together, Clementine whispered, and the fear in that single word made everyone in the room freeze. Victoria's pause lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough. Theodore saw the truth in her silence, saw the way Ms. Chin's face tightened with professional sympathy, and felt rage building in his chest like a tsunami. You're going to separate them, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Most families can't take two children, Ms. Chun said apologetically, especially not twins who've been through trauma. The state will do everything possible to keep them together, but realistically, she didn't need to finish. They all understood. Over my dead body, Isabella said, and suddenly she was moving, racing up the stairs toward the twins. Girls, go back to the room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you to. Isabella, stop, Victoria commanded. You're only making this harder for them. But Isabella wasn't listening. She gathered both twins in her arms, holding them against her like she could shield them from the entire world through sheer force of will. I won't let them take you, she whispered fiercely. I promised your mama I'd keep you safe, and I keep my promises. Theodore watched this scene unfold and felt something break open inside his chest. Here was love in its purest form, a woman willing to fight the entire world for children who weren't even legally hers. And here he stood, with all his wealth and power, completely useless to protect the people who had somehow become his entire world in the span of a few hours. Isabella, Victoria's voice had changed, becoming softer, more pleading. You can't win this fight. You know you can't. Come with me now. Help me build the case against his company, and maybe, we can find a way to keep the girls together." The offer hung in the air like a lifeline, and Theodore knew with sick certainty what choice Isabella would have to make. "What are you asking?" Isabella said quietly, though they all knew. "Leave him," Victoria said simply. "Come with me. Testify about the evictions you witnessed tonight. Help me destroy the empire that killed Sarah. Do that, and I'll use every legal resource I have to fight for those girls." Theodore felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. This was the choice that would define everything. Isabella could save the twins by destroying him, or she could stay with him and watch the children disappear into a system that would tear them apart. "Isabella," he said quietly, his voice rough with pain. "Do it." She turned to look at him, her eyes wide with shock. "Do it," he repeated. "Go with your sister. Save them. They need you more than I do." "Theodore, no," she whispered, but he could see the war playing out across her face. Love battled with responsibility, desire fought with duty, and underneath it all was the terrible knowledge that she couldn't save everyone. "He's right," Victoria said, and for the first time tonight, her voice held no malice. "Isabella, you know he's right. You can't choose him over them. You're not that selfish." The words hit their mark with devastating accuracy. Theodore watched Isabella's face change, watching her realize that this wasn't just about choosing between him and her sister. This was about choosing between her own happiness and the children who needed her to be stronger than her feelings. "I have to go," she whispered, and the words fell between them like stones into a grave. "I know," Theodore said, though saying it felt like ripping his own heart out. "I know you do." The twins were crying now, clinging to Isabella as they sensed the seismic shift happening around them. Ms. Chun was approaching with gentle determination, and Officer Martinez was checking his watch like he had a dozen other crises to handle before dawn. "Isabella," Victoria said, extending her hand. "It's time." Theodore watched the woman he'd fallen for in 3 impossible hours walk away from him, carrying 2 sobbing children toward a future he couldn't share. He watched his sister, his heart breaking for both of them, try to offer comfort that felt more like a prison sentence. And as the elevator doors closed on the 4 of them, leaving him alone in his vast penthouse with nothing but the city lights for company, Theodore Wayne realized that he'd finally learned what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. His phone buzzed with messages, more legal troubles, more crises, more problems that his money could solve. But for the first time in his life, Theodore didn't care about any of it. He'd found his family and lost them in the same night. And the worst part was knowing that somewhere out there, Isabella was making the same devastating choice, sacrificing her own heart to save the children she loved, walking away from the man who had somehow become her entire world in the space of a few impossible hours. Some heartbreaks, Theodore realized, were too big for money to fix. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that sometimes the darkest hour was just the universe taking a deep breath before unleashing a miracle that would change everything. Are you feeling that heartbreak as deeply as I am right now? Drop a comment below about a time when you had to choose between what you wanted and what was right, because this story is far from over, and sometimes the greatest victories come from the most devastating defeats. The dawn was still hours away, but everything was about to change in ways none of them could imagine. Theodore stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sun rise over a city that had never felt more foreign to him. He'd been awake for 36 hours straight, his usually immaculate appearance forgotten, his empire crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. But all he could think about was the way Clementine had whispered butterfly to her sister, the way Isabella's hand had felt in his, the way Ramona had looked at him with such pure trust when she'd said he had kind eyes. His phone had been ringing nonstop. Lawyers, board members, investors demanding answers he didn't have. The morning news was already running stories about the billionaire slumlord and his reign of terror against vulnerable families. Victoria Hastings had wasted no time launching her media campaign, and Theodore's reputation was being systematically destroyed with surgical precision. But it wasn't until his assistant knocked on the door at 7 a.m. that the real blow came. "Mr. Wayne." Vivian Cross stepped into the penthouse, her usually perfect composure cracked with exhaustion and worry. "The board called an emergency meeting. They're discussing a vote of no confidence." Theodore turned from the window, and Vivian actually stepped back at the look on his face. "Let them vote," he said quietly. "Sir, let them take the company, Vivian. Let them take everything." Theodore moved to his desk, pulling out a file he'd never touched before, his parents' papers, the ones he'd been too afraid to read for 20 years. "I need you to do something for me. Something more important than saving Wayne Enterprises." 30 minutes later, Theodore was sitting in his car outside the law offices of Hastings and Associates. Dr. Elena Wayne's patient file spread across his lap. His mother had been more than just a doctor. She'd been a researcher, an advocate, a woman who'd spent her life fighting for children who had no one else to fight for them. And buried in her research notes, Theodore had found something that changed everything. Inside the law firm, Isabella sat across from her sister in a conference room that felt more like an interrogation chamber. The twins were in an adjacent playroom with a social worker, their quiet voices carrying through the glass partition like accusation and heartbreak combined. "You're making the right choice," Victoria said for the 10th time, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Sarah would have wanted you to fight for justice." "Would she?" Isabella asked quietly, not looking away from the twins. "Or would she have wanted you to fight for love?" Victoria's carefully composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the raw grief underneath. "Love doesn't change policy, Isabella. Love doesn't stop slumlords from destroying families." "Maybe not," Isabella said, finally turning to face her sister. "But hate doesn't heal anything either." Before Victoria could respond, her assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Hastings? Theodore Wayne is here. He says it's urgent." Victoria's face hardened. "Tell him he can speak to me through his lawyers." "Actually," the assistant said hesitantly, "he brought someone with him. A Dr. Patricia Morgan. She says she has information about the Miller case." Isabella's head snapped up. "Dr. Morgan? But she's the head of pediatric social services," Victoria finished, her brow furrowing. What could she possibly want? 5 minutes later, Theodore entered the conference room, followed by a woman in her 50s whose presence seemed to command immediate respect. Dr. Morgan carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades fighting for children's rights. And when she looked at the twins through the glass partition, her expression softened with genuine warmth. "Ms. Hastings," Dr. Morgan said, addressing Victoria, "Mr. Wayne has brought some very interesting information to my attention. Information that I believe changes the entire nature of this case." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "What kind of information?" Theodore stepped forward, and Isabella felt her heart clench at the sight of him. He looked exhausted, defeated, but there was something new in his eyes, a determination that seemed to burn from within. 20 years ago, Theodore said quietly, "My mother was researching a revolutionary approach to child welfare. She believed that the key to helping vulnerable children wasn't just removing them from bad situations. It was creating support systems that could keep families together while addressing the root causes of instability." He pulled out a thick folder, setting it on the conference table. "She was working with a nurse," he continued, his eyes finding Isabella's. "A brilliant, compassionate woman who shared her vision. Someone who understood that healing meant more than just treating symptoms." Isabella's breath caught. "Maria," she whispered. "Your mother and Maria Miller developed a comprehensive program," Dr. Morgan said, taking over the explanation. "Foster care alternatives, family preservation strategies, community support networks. It was groundbreaking work, but it was never implemented because—" She paused, her expression growing sad. "Because Dr. Wayne died before she could complete the pilot program." Victoria was staring at the folder like it contained explosives. "What does any of this have to do with—" "Everything," Theodore interrupted. "Maria Miller wasn't just a nurse who died in a car accident. She was a pioneer, a researcher, someone who dedicated her life to finding better ways to protect children and her daughters." He looked through the glass at Ramona and Clementine, who were building a tower out of blocks while social worker watched. "They're not just orphans in need of placement. They're living proof of everything their mother believed about the power of love and family." Dr. Morgan opened the folder, revealing pages of research notes, pilot program designs, and legal frameworks that were decades ahead of their time. "What Mr. Wayne is proposing," she said, "is finishing his mother's work. Using the Miller case as a pilot program for a new approach to child welfare. one that prioritizes family preservation and community support over institutional placement. Isabella felt hope fluttering in her chest, like a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Theodore said, his voice rough with emotion, "that there's a legal precedent for emergency guardianship in cases where the guardian was specifically chosen by the biological parent to carry on their work. Maria Miller didn't just save my life. She saved my mother's research notes. She kept them all these years, hoping someone would finish what they started." He pulled out another document, and Isabella's heart stopped. It was a letter, written in Maria's careful handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before her death. "She knew," Theodore said quietly. "Somehow, she knew she was in danger. She wrote this letter naming you, Isabella, as the person she wanted to continue her advocacy work, the person she trusted to raise her daughters according to the principles she and my mother developed." Victoria snatched the letter, reading it quickly, her face growing paler with each line. This is a legal document," she breathed, "witnessed and notarized. It's more than that," Dr. Morgan said. "Combined with Mr. Wayne's proposal to fund and implement the Miller-Wayne Family Preservation Program, it creates a unique legal situation. The state has the authority to approve experimental custody arrangements when they serve the greater good and advance child welfare research." Isabella looked at Theodore, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You're saying—" "I'm saying we can keep them together," Theodore said, stepping closer to her. "All of us, if you're willing to trust me one more time." Through the glass, Ramona looked up from her blocks and saw them talking. She nudged her sister, and both twins pressed their faces against the partition, their eyes wide with hope and fear. "There's a catch," Victoria said, her voice tight. "There's always a catch." Dr. Morgan nodded. "The program would require unprecedented cooperation between all parties. Mr. Wayne would need to completely restructure his business practices, implementing the family preservation protocols in all his properties. Ms. Gump would need to return to school to complete the certification program her mother and Dr. Wayne designed. And you, Ms. Hastings," she looked at Victoria directly, "I would need to serve as the legal advocate and program coordinator. Work together." Victoria's voice was strangled. "All of us." "The Miller twins would live with Isabella," Dr. Morgan continued, "but under the joint guardianship of all 3 adults. Mr. Wayne would provide financial support and housing. Ms. Gump would provide primary care and advocacy, and you, Ms. Hastings, would ensure legal oversight and program compliance." Isabella felt tears streaming down her face as the impossible became possible right before her eyes. "It's not traditional," Dr. Morgan admitted, "but neither was anything Dr. Wayne and Maria Miller envisioned. Sometimes changing the world requires breaking a few rules." Theodore was looking at Isabella with such hope, such love, that she could barely breathe. But it was Victoria's voice that broke the silence. "Sarah always said the system was broken," she said quietly. "She said the only way to fix it was to build something completely new." She looked at Theodore, and for the first time, Isabella saw something other than hatred in her sister's eyes. "If we do this," Victoria said, "if I agree to this insanity, you give up operational control of your company's residential properties. They get managed by an independent board focused on family preservation, not profit margins." "Done," Theodore said without hesitation. "And you fund this program for a minimum of 10 years, regardless of what happens between you and my sister." "Done." Victoria turned to Isabella. "And you commit to finishing Mom and Dad's dream. The doctoral program they always wanted you to pursue. The research that could change how we protect children." Isabella nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. "Then God help us all," Victoria said, reaching for her phone. "Dr. Morgan, what do we need to make this legal?" As the adults began discussing contracts and custody arrangements, Isabella found herself looking through the glass at the twins, who were now jumping up and down with excitement, despite not knowing exactly what was happening. Ramona pressed her hand against the glass, and Isabella pressed hers against the other side. Through the partition, she saw the little girl mouth 2 words that made her heart soar. "Coming home." Isabella nodded, tears streaming down her face as she mouthed back, "Coming home." Have you ever had a moment where something impossible suddenly became possible? Drop a comment below about a time when hope showed up just when you needed it most, because this family is about to face their biggest test yet, and the way they handle it will determine if love really can conquer everything. Theodore stepped up beside Isabella, his hand covering hers on the glass. And for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could actually make this work. The hardest part was over, or so they thought, because sometimes, just when everything seems to be falling into place, the universe tests your commitment one final time, and what was about to happen would either cement their bond forever or destroy everything they'd fought so hard to build. The emergency hearing was called for 2 p.m., just 6 hours after their breakthrough meeting. Isabella sat in the courthouse hallway, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as she watched Theodore pace like a caged lion. Across from them, Victoria was on her phone with someone from the state attorney general's office, her voice growing more tense with each passing minute. "What do you mean, public interest concerns?" Victoria was saying. "This is a legal custody arrangement, not a publicity stunt." The twins sat between Isabella and Theodore, Ramona reading quietly to Clementine from a book about butterflies someone had given them. They'd been told this was just paperwork, but both girls seemed to sense the tension radiating from every adult around them. "Isabella," Clementine whispered, tugging on her sleeve. "Are we in trouble?" "No, butterfly," Isabella said, using Maria's pet name without thinking. "Sometimes adults have to talk to judges to make sure everything is done the right way. That's all." But Isabella's stomach was in knots. 3 hours ago, everything had seemed perfect. The legal framework was solid. Dr. Morgan had approved the experimental program, and even Victoria had seemed genuinely hopeful about their unconventional family arrangement. Then the phone call started. First, it was Theodore's former property management company, claiming the custody arrangement was a conflict of interest designed to avoid legal liability. Then it was a conservative family values group that had somehow gotten wind of the story, arguing that placing children with unmarried cohabitants set a dangerous precedent. And finally, the call that had prompted this emergency hearing. Someone had leaked Theodore's financial troubles to the press, claiming he was using the children as a publicity stunt to salvage his reputation. "Mr. Wayne," a court clerk appeared in the doorway. "Judge Rodriguez will see all parties in chambers now." Judge Elena Rodriguez was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through to the truth of things. Isabella had researched her during their frantic morning preparation. She was known for her fierce protection of children's rights and her complete intolerance for manipulation or grandstanding. "This is highly irregular," Judge Rodriguez said without preamble as they filed into her chambers. "I've reviewed the documentation for your proposed arrangement, and while the legal precedents are technically sound, I have serious concerns about the motivations involved." Theodore stepped forward. "Your Honor, I understand the skepticism, but—" "Mr. Wayne," the judge interrupted, "in the past 48 hours, your company has faced multiple lawsuits. Your board has voted to remove you as CEO, and the media is calling you everything from slumlord to a publicity-seeking opportunist. Can you explain to me why I should believe this sudden interest in child welfare isn't simply damage control?" The question hung in the air like a sword over their heads. Isabella felt her heart sink as she realized how this must look from the outside. A disgraced billionaire trying to rehabilitate his image by playing savior to photogenic orphans. But before Theodore could answer, the chamber door opened. "Your Honor," the clerk said apologetically, "there's a Dr. Patricia Morgan here with additional evidence. She says it's urgent." Dr. Morgan entered carrying a box that looked like it had been stored in an attic for decades. Her face was flushed with excitement and something that looked almost like awe. "Judge Rodriguez," she said, setting the box on a conference table, "I need to amend my earlier testimony. There's something about this case that none of us knew, something that changes everything." She opened the box, revealing stacks of files, photographs, and what looked like medical records dating back 20 years. "After our meeting this morning, I went back to review Dr. Elena Wayne's research files," Dr. Morgan explained. "I wanted to make sure I understood the full scope of the program she and Maria Miller had developed. But what I found—" She pulled out a thick file folder. "What I found was evidence of a connection that goes back much further than any of us realized." Judge Rodriguez leaned forward. "What kind of connection?" Dr. Morgan opened the folder, revealing a photograph that made Isabella gasp. It showed a much younger Maria Miller, standing next to Dr. Elena Wayne in what was clearly a hospital setting. But it wasn't just a professional photo. Both women were holding babies, and the love in their expressions was unmistakable. Maria Miller wasn't just Dr. Wayne's research partner, Dr. Morgan said quietly. She was her closest friend. They attended nursing and medical school together, and when Dr. Wayne had difficulty conceiving, Maria was there through every fertility treatment, every disappointment, every hope. Theodore had gone completely still, his eyes locked on the photograph. When Theodore was finally born, Dr. Morgan continued, Maria was the first person besides his parents to hold him. She was his godmother, though it was never officially documented. The revelation hit the room like lightning. That's why she recognized him in the hospital after his parents died, Dr. Morgan said. That's why she kept his mother's research all these years. And that's why she pulled out another document. That's why she spent the last 20 years tracking his life, waiting for the right moment to reach out. Judge Rodriguez was studying the documents with intense focus. Are you saying Maria Miller deliberately sought out Mr. Wayne 3 weeks ago? Not exactly, Dr. Morgan said, but I found this in her personal effects. She handed over a letter dated 6 months ago, addressed to Theodore Wayne, but never sent. Theodore's hand shook as he read it aloud. My dear Theodore, you won't remember me, but I was your mother's dearest friend. I held you the day you were born, and I held her hand the day she died. I know about the work she never finished, the dream she had for helping families like mine. My daughters don't know about our connection, but I've watched you grow into the man your mother always believed you could become. I think it's time you knew the truth about what she was trying to accomplish and why it matters now more than ever. Your mother's godson, even if you never knew it. With love, Maria. The silence that followed was profound. She never got the chance to send it, Dr. Morgan said softly. But she died saving you anyway. Just like she'd promised your mother, she would always protect you. Isabella looked at Theodore and saw a man coming apart at the seams. 20 years of carefully buried grief finally breaking free. She knew, he whispered. She knew who I was, and she saved me anyway. More than that, Victoria said, and everyone turned to look at her in surprise. She was reading another document from the box, tears streaming down her face. According to this, Maria Miller left instructions. If anything happened to her, if she died before she could complete your mother's work, her daughters would be placed with. She looked up at Theodore. With their godbrother. With you. Judge Rodriguez sat back in her chair, the weight of these revelations clearly affecting her deeply. So this isn't a publicity stunt, she said slowly. This is a woman keeping a 20-year-old promise to a friend, and a man finally understanding his true family legacy. It's more than that, Isabella said, finding her voice for the first time since entering the chamber. It's proof that love finds a way. Maria spent 20 years protecting Theodore from a distance, just like she promised his mother. And now we have the chance to honor both of their dreams. She stood up, her conviction growing stronger with every word. Your Honor, I know this looks complicated from the outside. I know there are people who think we're trying to manipulate the system. But sometimes the system needs to be challenged by something bigger than bureaucracy. Sometimes it needs to be challenged by love. Theodore rose to stand beside her, and Isabella felt strength flowing between them like electricity. These children aren't political statements or publicity opportunities, he said. They're my family. They were always my family. I just didn't know it yet. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure they know they're loved, protected, and valued for exactly who they are. Victoria stood up too, completing their triangle of determination. And I'll spend mine making sure that other families get the same chance we're asking for, she said. That no other Sarah has to die on the streets while we argue about proper procedures and traditional definitions of family. Judge Rodriguez looked at each of them in turn, then at the mountain of evidence spread across her desk. Dr. Morgan, she said finally, in your professional opinion, is this arrangement in the best interests of the children? Absolutely, Dr. Morgan said without hesitation. These children need stability, love, and continuity. They need to be together, and they need to be with people who understand their mother's values and will honor her memory. This arrangement provides all of that and more. Judge Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying the photograph of Maria and Dr. Elena Wayne with their babies. 20 years, she murmured. 20 years Maria Miller kept this promise. She looked up at Theodore. Do you promise to keep it for the next 20? I promise to keep it forever, Theodore said, his voice strong and clear. Then let's make this official, Judge Rodriguez said, reaching for a gavel. Emergency custody is granted to Isabella Gump, with Theodore Wayne and Victoria Hastings as co-guardians under the Miller-Wayne Family Preservation Program pilot initiative. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, and suddenly Isabella was crying and laughing at the same time. Theodore's arms came around her, and even Victoria was smiling through her tears. But it was the sound from the hallway that made their hearts soar. The twins had been listening at the door, and Ramona's voice carried clearly through the wood. Clementine, we're going home. We're really going home. As they emerged from the judge's chambers to find two little girls jumping up and down with joy, Isabella realized that sometimes the most impossible dreams were just life taking the long way around to give you exactly what you needed. Theodore knelt down to the twins' level, and when they threw themselves into his arms, Isabella saw the completion of a circle that had been 20 years in the making. Welcome to the family, he whispered, and this time, no one could take those words away. Are you crying as much as I am right now? Drop a comment below about a moment when everything finally came together in your life, because this incredible journey is almost at its end, and you're going to want to see how this beautiful family writes their new beginning together. The hardest battles have been fought. The impossible had become possible. And love, complicated, messy, unconventional love, had won. But the real adventure was just beginning. 1 year later, the sound of children's laughter echoing through the halls of the Miller-Wayne Foundation building had become Theodore's favorite symphony. He stood at the window of his new office, smaller than his old corporate suite, but infinitely more meaningful, watching Isabella lead a group of families through the courtyard below. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd finally found her calling, her dark hair catching the autumn sunlight as she gestured animatedly to the parents gathered around her. Mr. Theodore. Clementine's voice burst through his door like sunshine, followed immediately by the 8-year-old herself. Isabella says dinner's almost ready, and Ramona finished her science project. Theodore smiled, closing his laptop without a second thought. A year ago, he'd been a man who worked 16-hour days and measured success in profit margins. Now, he was someone who knew that the most important meeting of any day was the one that happened around the dinner table at 6 o'clock sharp. Where's your sister? He asked, scooping Clementine up for their traditional end-of-day hug. Showing Victoria her butterfly garden, Clementine said, wrapping her arms around his neck. She grew 17 different types this year. Through the window, Theodore could see exactly what she meant. Victoria Hastings, now Victoria Hastings Miller, having legally taken Maria's surname in honor of her memory, was crouched beside 9-year-old Ramona in the Foundation's community garden. The former corporate attorney had traded her power suits for jeans and cardigans, and her perpetual scowl had been replaced by something Theodore never would have believed possible: genuine contentment. Mr. Theodore, Clementine said, her voice taking on the serious tone she used for important questions. Are you going to marry Isabella soon? Theodore nearly choked on his own breath. What makes you ask that, butterfly? Because you look at her the same way Daddy looked at Mama in the pictures, Clementine said matter-of-factly. And Victoria says it's about time you stopped being scared. Victoria said that, did she? Theodore asked, though he couldn't hide his smile. Uh-huh. She says Mama always told her that when you find your person, you don't wait around for the perfect moment, because there's no such thing. You just love them and trust that everything else will work out. The wisdom of an 8-year-old quoting her late mother through her honorary aunt was almost too much for Theodore's heart to handle. Well, he said, setting Clementine down and pulling something small and velvet from his desk drawer. What do you think of this? Clementine's eyes went wide as saucers. Is that for Isabella? It was my mother's, Theodore said, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. I've been carrying it around for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. The right moment is now, Clementine said with the absolute certainty of youth. Tonight, after dinner, when we're all together, that's when families make big announcements. Theodore's heart swelled at the casual way she said families. It had taken months for the twins to fully trust that this new life was permanent, that the adults in their world wouldn't disappear the way their mother had. But somewhere along the way, they'd stopped asking when they were going home and started simply being home. The Miller-Wayne Family Preservation Program had exceeded every expectation. In its first year, they'd helped 43 families stay together, prevented over 200 evictions through emergency assistance and mediation, and completely revolutionized the approach to child welfare in the city. More importantly, they'd proven that love-centered solutions worked better than bureaucracy-centered ones. Theodore had given up his corporate empire willingly, watching his former board members carve up Wayne Enterprises while he poured his energy into something that actually mattered. His net worth had decreased substantially, but his net happiness had increased beyond measure. Isabella had returned to school part-time, pursuing the doctoral program in family advocacy that would make her the leading expert on the Miller-Wayne approach. She studied during the twins' school hours and dedicated her evenings to being present for homework, bedtime stories, and the 1,000 small moments that made a family. And Victoria had become the legal powerhouse they'd always needed, fighting for policy changes that would make their model scalable nationwide. But more than that, she'd become the sister Isabella had always missed, and the aunt the twins had never known they needed. "There's my favorite CEO." Isabella's voice came from the doorway, warm with affection and just a hint of teasing. She'd started calling him after he'd been officially named Chief Emotional Officer of the Foundation, a title Ramona had suggested and the board had unanimously approved. "Just CEO?" Theodore asked, standing to wrap his arms around her. "I thought I'd been promoted to favorite everything." Isabella laughed, the sound that had become his personal definition of home. "Don't get cocky, Wayne. You're still competing with ice cream and butterfly gardens for the girls' affections." "Tough competition," he agreed, then noticed she was looking at something over his shoulder. He turned to see Clementine holding up the ring box like a trophy. "Surprise," Clementine announced. "Theodore's going to ask you to marry him tonight." Isabella's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, joy, amusement, and finally, pure love. She looked from the ring to Theodore's slightly mortified expression and started laughing. "Well," she said, reaching for the box, "I guess we should probably say yes then." Theodore asked. "This is a family decision," Isabella said, her voice soft with emotion. "Everything important is." 20 minutes later, they were all gathered around the dinner table in the Foundation's family quarters, the apartment above the offices that had become their official address. Victoria was helping Ramona explain her butterfly life cycle project, while Clementine regaled them with stories from her art class. But when dinner was finished and the dishes were cleared, an expectant hush fell over the table. "So," Victoria said, her eyes twinkling with mischief, "are we going to address the elephant in the room, or are we going to pretend that certain people aren't carrying around engagement rings in their pockets?" "Victoria," Isabella protested, but she was laughing. Theodore stood up, suddenly more nervous than he'd been in any boardroom or courtroom. These 4 females had become his entire world, and the thought of officially binding his life to theirs felt both perfectly natural and monumentally significant. "A year ago," he began, "I was a man who thought success meant accumulating things. Money, power, buildings, possessions. I measured my worth by what I owned instead of who I loved." He looked around the table at faces that had become more precious to him than any fortune. "Then I met a nurse who taught me that real wealth comes from taking care of people. I met 2 little girls who showed me that family isn't about blood or legal documents. It's about choosing to love someone every single day. And I reconnected with someone who helped me understand that even the deepest wounds can heal if you're brave enough to let them." He pulled out the ring box, dropping to one knee beside Isabella's chair. "Isabella Gump," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You taught me how to be human again, how to love without conditions, how to build instead of just accumulate. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life being part of this incredible family we've created?" Isabella was crying, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely yes." The twins erupted in cheers, and Victoria was wiping away tears she probably didn't want anyone to notice. As Theodore slipped his mother's ring onto Isabella's finger, he felt the presence of the women who'd made this moment possible. Dr. Elena Wayne and Maria Miller, two friends whose love had created a legacy that transcended death. Group hug, Clementine demanded, and suddenly they were all tangled together in a mess of arms and laughter and tears and joy. Later, after the twins were in bed and Victoria had retreated to her own apartment with promises to start planning the wedding immediately, Theodore and Isabella stood on the foundation's rooftop terrace, looking out over the city that had brought them together. "Are you sure about this?" Isabella asked, her hand in his, Maria's ring catching the moonlight. "Marrying someone who comes with 2 kids, a complicated sister, and a career dedicated to revolutionizing social services. Are you sure about marrying someone who used to be everything wrong with capitalism and is still figuring out how to be human?" Theodore countered. Isabella laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "I'm sure about marrying the man who chose love over money, family over empire, and hope over fear. I'm sure about the man who keeps his promises and sees butterflies instead of obstacles." They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of promise, while the city sparkled below them and the future stretched ahead like an open road. 6 months later, the wedding was held in the Foundation's community garden, surrounded by Ramona's butterfly sanctuary and Victoria's vegetable plots. Isabella wore her mother's dress, altered to fit perfectly, and carried a bouquet of flowers the twins had grown themselves. Theodore wore his father's watch and his biggest smile, standing under an arch covered in butterflies and wildflowers. The guest list included social workers and former tenants, foundation families and reformed slumlords, judges and journalists who'd watched their story unfold with wonder. Dr. Morgan officiated, declaring them not just husband and wife, but co-directors of a revolution built on love. But the moment that made Theodore's heart stop was when Ramona and Clementine stepped forward during the vows, each carrying a small box. "These are for you," Ramona said solemnly, opening her box to reveal a simple silver band. "We saved our allowances and asked Victoria to help us pick them out. They're promise rings," Clementine added, "because we want to promise to be your daughters forever, if you want to be our daddy forever." Theodore's vision blurred as he knelt to accept the rings, one from each girl. "I promise," he whispered, his voice breaking with joy, "forever and always." As Isabella placed her own wedding band on his finger, she leaned close enough to whisper, "Ready to change the world, Mr. Miller Wayne?" "With you," Theodore whispered back, using the hyphenated name they'd all agreed to share. "I'm ready for anything." 1 year after the wedding, the Miller Wayne Family Preservation Program had gone national, with foundations opening in 12 cities and legislation pending in 6 states. Isabella had completed her doctorate and was consulting with government agencies worldwide. Victoria had been appointed to the state family court, where she was implementing reforms that prioritized keeping families together. And the twins, now 10 years old and wiser than their years, had become the unofficial ambassadors of the foundation, speaking to groups about what family really meant and why love mattered more than rules. Theodore stood in his office, reading a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from a family in California whose eviction had been stopped by their West Coast Foundation office, whose children were now thriving in stable housing with wraparound services. Every day, the letter read, "My kids asked me to tell them the story of the twins and the businessman who learned how to love. Thank you for showing us that miracles aren't magic. They're just people choosing to care about each other." That afternoon, as Theodore watched Isabella teach a parenting class while the twins helped younger children with their homework, he realized something profound. He'd spent the first 30 years of his life accumulating wealth, but the last 3 had been spent accumulating something far more valuable. He'd accumulated love, purpose, family, hope, and unlike money or power, these were the kinds of riches that only multiplied when shared. "Daddy," Clementine called from across the room, using the name that still made his heart skip a beat. "Come see what Ramona grew in her lap." Theodore closed his laptop, something that had become remarkably easy over the years, and walked toward his family. As he did, he caught sight of a photo on the wall. Maria Miller and Dr. Elena Wayne, young and hopeful, holding their babies and dreaming of a better world. "Thank you," he whispered to the picture, then louder, to the room full of families whose lives have been changed by love. "We did it. We actually did it." Because sometimes, just sometimes, the most impossible dreams turn out to be the most necessary ones. Sometimes a billionaire learns that real wealth means having people to love. Sometimes a nurse discovers that healing the world starts with healing one family at a time. Sometimes estranged sisters find their way back to each other through shared purpose. And sometimes, two little girls who lose everything discover that they've actually found everything they ever needed. The Miller Wayne family had learned the most important truth of all, that love isn't just an emotion. It's an action, a choice, a commitment to keep showing up for each other no matter what challenges arise. And as they gathered around their dinner table that night, Theodore and Isabella, Ramona and Clementine, and Victoria, who just stopped by, but somehow always ended up staying for dessert, they knew with absolute certainty that their story was just beginning. Because the best families aren't the ones that never face problems. They're the ones that face everything together. Thank you for taking this incredible journey with the Miller Wayne family. Their story proves that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose, and that love really can change the world one heart at a time. If this story touched you the way it touched me, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to believe in miracles today. What's your own story of unexpected family or chosen love? Drop in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories inspire the next incredible journey we'll take together. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love to transform everything it touches.